Washington and Dan, maybe. I mean, if we say that Manchester, Greater Manchester's economy is built on cotton, Cottonopolis, which is a direct link to the slave trade, perhaps Washington and Dan might be able to actually, what are the figures we're talking about if we're saying Greater Manchester's wealth is built on the blood of slaves?
To put a figure to it would be quite irresponsible, because I have seen documents and figures being bounced around the place. However, what we can identify to date and from then back is that there are many legacies that have come from a direct result of trading via Britain to the west coast of Africa, to the West Indies and back to Britain, which is a triangular trade. And some of these artifacts range and legacies range from the financial sector. The Barclays Bank, which everybody knows, came out of that era. We're talking about the whole issue of some of the vast structures that today's are houses, factories, you name it. All different types of buildings that were funded from profits made from this trade. And then we look at even technology. This very item behind us here today, the invention from this in Bolton was a result of the profits that companies like McConnell and Kennedy made out of cotton that went into research to further profit from cotton when they realized, A, that the imported cotton wasn't sufficient enough to make check to go back to West Africa, and they put money into inventions to get machines like these so they could turn over very fast more cotton. How did cotton arrive in this country? It came from two principal slave-grown areas, Levant, which is in the Mediterranean, and it came from the West Indies. Where did the labor came from? Those were slave labors. And in the process of trying to satisfy this West African market in cotton check, which was a high-quality type of cotton that the people in West Africa wore, because it was a well-developed civilization, but when Europeans went inside there, they couldn't satisfy that market from the local produced check. And out of their experience of trading, they were able to come back to countries like these and produce more check. Specifically, even Bolton, they exploit the geography of Bolton for production of cotton, because one, the altitude at which Bolton is, and there was waterways which were allowing them to spun cotton to make them into a more refined cotton to export to West Africa. So those were some of the things. And then if you want to look back to latter days, like, for example, places like Whitehaven, Manchester, there are so many examples, Liverpool. Most of the current infrastructures in terms of buildings and I would say some of the services that were offered is carefully documented in a most recent book published just last year, Britain After the Abolition. So there are so many examples, but to put a figure to it, everyone is saying that you'll be responsible historian if you try to do that. There are figures I've seen bouncing around. For example, a ship leaving Liverpool to West Africa may take something of the quantity of about 500,000 pounds worth of goods. The value of that slave to the West Indies may be 3 times that. And they multiply that, what they take back from the West Indies into England, 5-6 folds. And hence, when we say that here was built on the backs of slavery, it is that type of equation we're talking about.
My question to the panel would be, 2007 was a year of slavery, and we didn't see much of this then. Most people forgot about it now because it's 2008. What happened for Bolton 2007? I didn't see much going on in Bolton. My next question is that schools are where this thing should be happening. And again, Bolton does that acknowledge this kind of thing in our schools. So there's 2 points there that I think we need to look at. And somebody who's lived in Bolton most of my life, I didn't know anything about slavery, about Jane Watkins, which is a sad inflex on Bolton. Again, there are no officials here from the council representing Bolton here today.
Well, I work for the council, and this performance that you saw just before has been performed here twice already, and during 2007. There's been, which was publicised quite widely. There's been the displays for revealing histories around the museum since the date of 25th of March, and last year. Also, we've republished or reprinted James Watkins' narrative, which is available, and you'll find it in all the libraries as well. And on top of that, we've produced a pack for the local schools that teachers can use, using the local resources from the library and the museum to actually help teachers teach about slavery in the schools. So we have been quite busy.
One of the things we know, and I do it through my project, which is the Respect Council Mentoring Project, BME don't access...
Don't swear.
Sorry, I won't say the word. Black Asian communities don't access libraries and museums, and we know that. And you putting posters in the libraries won't attract that kind of community.
Disagree with you, Donald, actually. We go in libraries. We go in libraries, we go in shops, we go in places. Come on, we do.
Well,
but there's a wider distribution.
Okay,
but don't say we don't, because, you know, we do.
Well, if you want to stick around, we could certainly furnish you with some copies of Watkins' narrative.
Yes, and we have got some copies to give out.
Yeah.
You're going to get a book, you're not going to get a cup of tea. I'm a bit disgraced about not getting a cup of tea.
Yeah. I would like to address the issue of putting on a historical hat about teaching about slavery. And I do appreciate the comments our two actors here made about researching and delivering it in a more novel way. But the issue of the story and the content of it, where it goes after the bicentenary, is probably the most important question I need to ask and answer. I am writing a paper beyond slavery, beyond the bicentenary, and it's interesting to see what I have found across England, how different people have decided to celebrate or commemorate this whole issue that has passed on over a year ago. And in terms of the libraries and similar institutions and museums, they are asked to play a political role or interpret something in my mind which they want to change public opinion, and that is not their role. In my opinion, they are there to inform, but on the question of slavery, if the actors and the people who really understand it are given the will to say this is what they have interpreted, this is what have been documented, it's a political issue you're taking on. And institutions like these, they are not the best to sell them through. So I don't see much happening after all that shebang that took place last year, if you know that word.
Good Jamaican word. Can I just...
One more comment on that, if I can. Is that it's interesting. I mean, the good thing is that the abolition of slavery is now in the national curriculum, and that's been embedded to be taught beyond 2007. All the pieces we've done this year, or now last year, we're doing again this year. So we'll be in Manchester on April the 5th, which is a Saturday, and that's doing a promenade performance where you'll meet 6 characters who actually are on both sides of the argument, and engage the audience to interact with them. So that's quite a sort of can be a tense encounter in places. So there is, we're doing a lot next year.
Can I just say, and it's not a correction because I've done it myself a million times, it's actually the abolition of the slave trade. It was not the abolition of slavery. That's very important. The other thing to acknowledge is that the abolition of the slave trade was not an act done out of humanity. It was money.
Somebody who has researched this point.
It was money.
And it's very hard to get any of the official sources. It's very hard to get any of the official sources to actually acknowledge this, that it was actually in Britain's economic interest to abolish the slave trade when it did. And so the lesson that Eric Williams, who wrote Capitalism and Slavery, gives us is that follow a country's economic interests rather than its highfalutin moral statements. And I think there is a danger in being over naive about, the abolitionist movement. In fact, Professor Walvin in 1999 talked about the distorting lens of the anti-slavery movement, Because Britain and many of the people who interpret this history, they focus on the abolition movement because it makes Britain, it makes the country feel good. Let's not talk about what we did for 358 years or whatever. Let's talk about for that little bit of time where we actually fought for abolition, because that's what gives us our dignity. And I think that it's to lie by omission. To focus only on certain aspects of Britain's involvement at the expense of others. It's not to say these other things didn't happen, but to not talk about them, to not acknowledge them. And that's the struggle I have with much of the debate that has happened over this year.